In this video, I'm going to solve one of the greatest mysteries in humankind. Something that has baffled experts, struck fear into the hearts of ordinary people, something believed unexplainable, elusive, ethereal, frustrating. That's right, today I'm going to solve the mystery of where the hell is the lactate threshold. And I might also solve one of the other ones you just saw. I'm thinking probably solve Jack the Ripper. I've got a couple of ideas. And what do you have to do? Well, you've got to stay watching as I run you through what the lactate threshold is, why it's important, how you find it, and how you train it. And also do me a massive favour, make sure you subscribe to the channel to help get us to 100k before my birthday. That rhymes, I'm a poet, I didn't even realise. But back to finding out where the lactate threshold is. And the first thing we've got to do is we've got to get a bit sciencey and figuring out what it is. Just so happens, I know a man with a lab. So I decided to come to the lab to prove my point, but I can't just do it on my own. Come in, Mikey the scientist! Okay, here was the plan. I was going to try and explain this to Mikey's daughter Posey, who is what, 9? Is Posey 9 or 10?
9, correct.
9. So that I could prove that I can break down this concept easily. Posey's not here, so I'm going to try and break it down to Mikey, the head of science. So that's actually more nerve-wracking, because I'm not breaking it down.
My biochemical pathway is up there, so okay. This is better be good.
Yeah, panic. Right, when you exercise, this is the first thing, your body accumulates lactate in the blood and in the muscles. But what that really means to you and I is, there comes a point intensity-wise where lactate accumulates in the legs. If you've ever felt the burn in the legs when you're exercising, it's that it spikes so much and you can't break it down in time because you're exercising so hard that you have to slow down. I've commandeered Mikey during his lunchtime. So what does that look like on this lovely graph that I've drawn up, Mikey? Well, it looks something like this. Let's say you are exercising in your aerobic base zones. Intensity is quite easy. That's quite nice, right? And then as you start to get harder in intensity, this is about a point where your body goes, oh, there's lactate in my blood. I can feel that. They call that LT1. It's like the first threshold, but it's nothing to worry about. However, the more intense you get, the more lactate builds up, and then eventually, boom!
Oh, wasn't ready for that.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't ready for that. Around about here, sometimes it could be here, it varies in everyone, there is a point where your body can no longer get rid of the lactate that's accumulating, and it makes you slow down. And in the simplest way I can explain this, the reason we need to know exactly where our threshold is so that we can run at it in training, hopefully push it a bit this way as our body gets used to it, which means we get to run faster. Simple-ish. Did I explain that?
Yeah, I've got it.
You sure?
I've got it.
I don't know if I explained it well enough. I suppose we then need to know how you find your own lactate threshold. So an easy way to understand the lactate threshold is the change between being able to use oxygen, which is the aerobic system, to not being able to, which is the anaerobic system. And it's very roughly defined as about the effort that you could hold for around an hour. And the gold standard of testing for the lactate threshold is in a lab. And Mary and I did this a while ago, and it basically works like this. You run on a treadmill, and every minute or so they ask you how hard you feel you're working out of 10. They log your heart rate, and they prick your finger for blood to tell them what the lactate is in the blood. For reference, at about 2 to 2.5 millimoles per litre, that's the first threshold we talked about where the lactate's first registered as above normal. Then the speed increases every 1 minute by 1 kilometre an hour, always checking how hard it feels after that minute and what the lactate is in your blood. And at around 4 millimoles per litre of lactate, that's the threshold where if you keep exercising, you can only hold it for a short time and will eventually have to slow down. Here's my results and here's Mary's results, and for me, you can see that my heart rate is about at 174 beats per minute when I get to my threshold of 4 millimoles per litre, and it starts to rise quite quickly thereafter. And that was around an 8.5 effort out of 10 and 17 kilometers an hour on the treadmill. But we don't all have the benefit of being able to go into a lab and do a test, do we? So what are some other ways that we might be able to find our lactate threshold? Well, the next way for me is I look at some race results I already have. The thing is, if we've got some existing data, we might as well use it. And I've got a recent half marathon here where I know I was going all out, and the pace equated to 3:44 per kilometre with a heart rate of 178 average. And then this 10k, I just took the last 7 of those 10 kilometres to account for the heart rate getting up to threshold, and I worked out the pace was 3:32 a kilometre and the average heart rate for those 7 kilometres was 182 when you factor in the heat of Thailand. So between lab testing and real world situations, I can estimate my heart rate needs to be between 174, probably a little bit higher, to 182 beats per minute to be training my lactate threshold. And when you factor in a bit of heat in this country, that's probably around a pace of 3:45 to 4 minutes per kilometre. But if you don't have race results, don't worry. An easy way to do it is this: 30-minute time trial. Now this is one where you're going to have to go all out, find a flat route, run hard for 30 minutes but at a pace you can sustain for 30 minutes, and then you take the last 20 minutes, what's your average heart rate and average pace there, bingo bango. That is also a good indicator of your lactate threshold. And also a quick tip for you, you can get all of your zones from that data if you just go to the Joe Friel heart rate calculator online like I'm doing now, input that threshold and it'll give you the rest of your zones. And the final way, if you don't want the faff of any of that, is simply to run at about 7 or 8 out of 10, feel comfortably hard, and you should only be able to speak in fragmented sentences of about 3 words. Definitely shouldn't be able to talk like I'm talking now or hold a conversation. It's not exact, but it's going to get you in the ballpark, and that's all that matters. So, we now know what the lactate threshold is, we know how to find it, now we've got to work out how to train it. To the track. So it's Wednesday and I've finally managed to get to the track because on Monday I, believe it or not, weirdly for the first time in 12 years, played football, 11-a-side for our staff versus the parents. My legs were a bit spicy yesterday and I got late home from a fixture. So it's now Wednesday and I'm going to talk you through how I plan to work my lactate threshold today. There's a few ways you can slice it, but this is my plan. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, I've had the benefit of going into the lab and having my lactate threshold actually tested. So in lab conditions, I know that my lactate turn point, as in when the lactate starts to accumulate so much that you kind of have to slow down, is around 174 beats per minute for me, which equated in the lab again to 17 kilometers an hour, which is about, I think it's about 3:35 per kilometer, and an RPE, like what it felt like, of 8.5 out of 10. But we're not in the lab. Hey, look who's back in the game. This might be her first run back after a long time out. So here's Mary.
First time in running kit for a while.
Yeah. So let's think about this while I'm doing my warm-ups. What are the 3 things that I learned in the lab? 174 beats per minute, 17 kilometers an hour, RPE of 8.5. What's the bit that's probably not as important because conditions change? It's the pace. I'm not gonna hit 17 kilometers an hour and expect that my heart rate is at 174 beats per minute, but I also know that my lactate threshold's around 174 beats per minute, which is 8.5 out of 10 RPE. So that's what I'm shooting for in these repeats. It's not the pace, it's the heart rate and the RPE put together. And it's good because 174 is around the top of my zone 3, so it does match up. It does mean that it's the top of zone 3, low zone 4, which should be around where your lactate threshold is. So here's what I plan to do. To hit the lactate threshold and get good value, I'm planning to do 1600 meter repeats at a heart rate of about 174. And then you do a 2-minute walking rest in between those repeats. That's the aim of this session. Like I say, my legs hurt, so I don't know how many reps I've got in me. You're supposed to do 4 to 6, but we're gonna see. So of course, 1600 meters, 4 laps of this track at around between my 10 and my half marathon pace. That's kind of where I'm aiming for, and that should get me to high zone 3, 174 beats per minute. How many times have I said it? Probably loads, but I'm trying to just make the point that I'm really trying to dial in on that lactate threshold.
Cool, I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I'll send you off with a cheer.
Oh, thanks, yeah. Right, are we ready?
Yep.
All right, yeah, thank you. Obviously, it's going to take a while for my heart rate to climb to where it needs to be, so just trying to keep it modest at the moment. Actually, I don't know what the time was for the overall 1600 meters or mile. I'll put it on the screen, but kept the heart rate perfectly about 174 once I got there, so really happy with that, and it felt like an 8.5. Nothing too punchy, but you feel like you're working, you know you're working. Okay, I'm gonna do rep 2 now. I've had slightly longer than 2 minutes, but today is all about just doing this experiment. But here we go, I'm gonna try and keep it to 174 again. I was very happy with that. Good, lots of talking, goodbye. That was a harder one. The heat really accumulates quickly here. It like builds. If you lift the camera, heart rate's gonna go sky high. It's not coming down at the moment. Actually, I'm learning something quite valuable here as I'm running round. Whilst it's really difficult to maintain my heart rate at lactate threshold for the pace I want to run, what will be interesting is if I keep doing this week after week is where I'm at way down the line. So I don't mind this at the moment, sweat in my eyes. I'm setting it as a benchmark, like as a baseline, and we go from there. But boy, it's hard today. Right, last rep. I'm only going to do 3 today because of the heat, because of where I am with the training and all of that and the week I've had. But it's been an interesting experiment. Let's see what happens on this one. See if I can just maintain my heart rate at lactate threshold. Don't worry about pace, because it definitely feels like an 8.5. Mary's running up to where she thinks I'm finishing, but I'm actually finishing here where I started. She ran up, bless her, to the finish line to get me on video. That last one was so hard because the heat is just merciless, and with a longer rep you just feel your heart rate going sky high immediately and the pace dropping. I mean, I tried to not think about the pace, tried to only think about the heart rate, but yeah, it was way too high for that rep, even for like a 410 per kilometer where I should be at 345. You know, that is what it is living in Thailand. Mary ran over to get me. You forgot that I started here.
I was being helpful.
Yeah, well, you were, but just in the wrong place. And as we take a super easy cool down, some other session ideas. I mean, the thing is with lactate threshold style runs is that it's like a 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 1600 meters, 2.2, 2.5 kilometers, something where you're running somewhere in between 5 and 20 minutes, I'd say, is a good bet for a lactate threshold run. So repeats of any of those, I'll put them in the description for this video, but they're a good shout for lactate threshold because they're not quite as hard as 400 meter, 800 meter repeats at VO2 max. So what I've learned from even just doing 3 reps of that is that those sessions are hard, because if anything else outside of a lab comes into play, like heat or hills or anything, you really struggle to keep the heart rate at what you consider to be threshold, because you know, it rises very quickly, pace goes down, you want to try and keep it that way. It's quite frustrating. So what can you do about it? Well, I think one of the things is we have a treadmill at home. It's much more controllable maybe to do lactate type runs on the treadmill sometimes, not all the time, because it's quite nice to train the body outside and really try and work on those 3 of feel and heart rate and pace, because they're the important things when it comes to running. Those are the 3 diagnostic things you have to think about while you're racing, right? So it's good to have to try and factor them in. Oh, it's gone very dark. Home time though, that's what matters, right? What's for dinner?
Jambalaya.
Chicken and chorizo jambalaya.
And
bit of carbs in.
Nice olive, avocado, tomato salad.
I'm going to suggest something. Mango smoothie?
Yeah.
Done. So I want to leave you with this, because everyone always asks me, what's the difference between tempo and threshold? And the answer is kind of not much. Even sports physiologists don't really agree. It's just a way of using terminology that one coach might use for their athletes, that I might use for my athletes, a different terminology. The easiest way I think I can describe it is maybe that a tempo run, when you go out and do tempo, that's just below your lactate threshold, whereas a threshold run is at around your threshold or just above. But to be honest with you, tempo, threshold, tomato, tomato, potato, potato. Can I just say, does anybody ever say potato? But you get what I'm saying is that different coaches, different physiologists will use different terminology for around about the same thing, training your lactate threshold, and that should be enough. Especially now because you know how unbelievably beneficial it can be. So how about this for a deal? If you found some value in this video, then subscribe to the channel and help us give you more value in the next video. I'm going to leave 3 session descriptions in the video description. And if you like this video, you're definitely going to like this video, which is why you should never miss the long run. And I think it's a good one. See you next Sunday.